Hi there, welcome back. Let's get more now on the big story. Thomas Frank has been appointed as the new Tottenham Hotspur head coach.
We're now joined by The Athletic's Jay Harris, who covers Tottenham but previously covered Brentford. Very good morning, Jay. I mean, arguably no one better placed to speak to this morning, so thank you so much for joining us. So Spurs have done it, haven't they? They've got their one and only target in Thomas Frank. You've spent a lot of time with him. Is this perhaps a bit of a gamble for him, considering the demands that Daniel Levy places on his managers?
Morning, guys. I don't think it is a gamble. This is an opportunity Thomas Frank has been waiting patiently for a really long time. You know, he's been at Brentford since October 2018. He was their assistant coach for a couple of years before that. And during that time as head coach, he's been linked with jobs at Chelsea, Manchester United, Aston Villa, and it felt like he was constantly being overlooked. He was never shy about his ambitions, but what he did always say was that he had close to the perfect football life at Brentford, and that he was supported by the club's owner, Matthew Benham, the director of football, Phil Giles, and that they were working on a really exciting project, and that he wouldn't leave Brentford unless he felt he could achieve a similar project somewhere else. And apparently, Tottenham's the place where he feels like he can take them on to another level.
And give us a bit of insight, Jay, as to why Spurs desperately wanted Thomas Frank. We understand he was their first and only choice. What are his main strengths as a coach?
I think one of the big differences between Thomas Frank and Ange Postecoglou, the man who'll be succeeding, is his tactical flexibility. You look at when Brentford were playing in the Championship and when they got promoted, they're one of the most exciting teams in the division. They had Ollie Watkins, Said Benrahma, Brian Mbeumo up front, and it was a joy to watch. And then when they got promoted to the Premier League, they became a bit more pragmatic. They switched to a 3-5-2. You had David Raya pumping the ball long for Ivan Toney, and they finished ninth using those tactics in their second year. And then you look at the evolution this season. Wissa and Mbeumo, Kevin Schade up front. They've all reached double figures in the league for goals. They finished in the top half again. So I think that's definitely appealing. And, you know, I've just mentioned all these different names: Wissa and Mbeumo, Watkins, Toney, Raya. These are all players who joined Brentford when they were under the age of 23. They were good, but they weren't great. And I think it's fair to say they've all evolved into superstars under Thomas Frank's watch.
Jay, Brentford are renowned, aren't they, for being a really well-run club. Everything is set up exactly how Thomas Frank wants it, really, after the time he's been there in terms of football operation. How much of a different experience will it be for him stepping in to Tottenham and their training ground, etc.?
Yeah, I do think what helps him out massively is that he has a pre-existing relationship with Tottenham's sporting director, Johan Lange. They're both from Denmark, and they worked together at a Danish club called Lyngby around 2 decades ago. And I actually think there are some similarities between Johan Lange and Brentford's director of football, Phil Giles. They're both quite quiet and reserved. They don't seek the limelight, and they both definitely look to find, I guess, hidden gems in the marketplace. And we've seen that a little bit with Spurs over the last year or so when they've signed Lucas Bergvall from Sweden and Antonin Kinski from the Czech Republic. I think the biggest challenge for Thomas Frank is there's going to be a massive difference in expectations. Brentford are underdogs. You know, they jokingly refer to themselves as just a bus stop in Hounslow, where Spurs are going to be playing in the Champions League. Brentford played around 43 games in all competitions last season. For Spurs, it was 60. So instantly, Thomas Frank, who's never managed in European competition before, has to get used to the grind of playing multiple games a week, the challenges of the Champions League, and just if things couldn't get any harder, his first competitive game in charge will be the UEFA Super Cup against PSG.
And just looking at Brentford for a moment, Jay, Frank spent 7 years at Brentford, turning from a Championship side to a well-established Premier League club. How will they go about replacing him? Because since Brentford have been in the top flight, they've survived, but they've thrived. There's not been any danger of going down. But surely Brentford fans will be fearing for this season.
I think this is probably one of the biggest decisions the club's ownership and senior figures have had during their time in charge. Because, like you said, Thomas Frank's been there for 7 years, but he was the assistant to Dean Smith for 2 years. That succession plan had been laid out. So really, this is the first time they've had to conduct a proper managerial search in nearly a decade. And I think they would have considered Justin Cochrane, who was Thomas Frank's assistant, as one of the potential replacements, but Justin Cochrane is following Thomas Frank to Spurs. So it's going to be really tricky for them. What Thomas Frank was crucial to at Brentford was instilling a really positive culture. And so I think that's what Brentford will be keeping an eye on. Not just someone who's very good on the pitch, but someone who off the pitch is warm and friendly, contributes to that really cultivating environment that Brentford have. But it's going to be really intriguing. We've obviously seen a few names thrown around like Kieran McKenna. I know that Brentford have liked him previously in the past. Just have to wait and see what they do. But I mean, for lots of young coaches looking at potential jobs this summer, I think Brentford would be a great opportunity for them. So I don't think there'll be a lack of interest in the role.
Yeah, it's a really intriguing opening, isn't it, in Brentford? In terms of Thomas Frank's insistence, really, on taking his or many of his backroom staff with him, why was that so important to him? Do you know?
Yeah, of course. Lots of managers take big backroom staffs with them when they go to different clubs. Ruben Amorim is a good example when he went to Manchester United. Ange Postecoglou is actually a bit of an exception to this rule. He doesn't really have assistants that follow him around. And if you want proof of why it was important Thomas Frank took Justin Cochrane, listen to interviews that Johan Visser and Brian Mbeumo have done over the last year or so. They've obviously both had fantastic seasons, and they've given Justin Cochrane a lot of credit. From what I understand, it's normally Thomas Frank and Justin Cochrane who work with the attacking players on the training ground, and other coaches take care of the defensive side. And then Chris Haslam, who's also following Thomas Frank to Spurs. I think Chris Haslam's been at Brentford as long as Thomas Frank, so they've got a really well-established relationship. The analyst Joe Newton has been at Brentford for 6 years, so he's been a part of that journey from the Championship into the Premier League. So he's surrounded himself with people who know how he works, know how to get the best out of him. And it's going to be important that he has those allies in an unfamiliar environment at the beginning.
And Jay, just finally from me, in terms of this coming season for Thomas Frank and Tottenham, what do you think will mark success? They're back in the Champions League, but what does he need to do to ensure he gets a second season and a third season, which of course Ange didn't?
This is actually, I think, a bit of an impossible question to answer, because this is a really difficult job, because Thomas Frank will always be the manager who succeeded Ange Postecoglou, and Tottenham fans still feel really conflicted about that. There are lots of them who were more than happy for Postecoglou to go before the Europa League final, who completely changed their minds afterwards. We've seen some of the comments from the players since Postecoglou's left. You know, Christian Romero put out quite a nice complimentary statement towards Postecoglou last night. There was a lot of love and affection in that squad towards Postecoglou, and one of Thomas Frank's first tasks is to sort of reunite the fan base and the players. If Thomas Frank finishes sixth with Spurs this season and they go into the knockout stages of a couple of cup competitions, on paper you would say that's pretty good, considering they finished 17th last year. But then you'll get a lot of Spurs fans who'll say, it doesn't really matter, we should have kept Postecoglou. He was the man who gave us our first piece of silverware in 17 years, our first European trophy in 41 years. So it's really hard to gauge. I think what Spurs fans will want to see is more consistent performances. They'll want to see players improve. I don't think too many did over the last year under Postecoglou. But it's quite a big challenge. I know Spurs performed badly in the league, but that Europa League final victory sort of changed everything about Postecoglou's legacy.